Hey there friends, Dave Paulides, Canadian Missing Project, a copyrighted edition for our video channel. And we are with the executive producer of the show, Huck, and she's giving me the side eye right now. And she says, Dad, stop talking, start rubbing. Yeah, you're a good girl. Yeah, you're a good girl. So, a lot of people ask, what kind of dog is this, Dave? This is a Great Pyrenees. And Huck weighs just about 100 pounds, and she's kind of small for a Pyrenees. We've seen them up to 200 pounds. And there's a lot of them up here in Montana on ranches. And there's usually, if a ranch has a couple, they usually have 2, 3, 4 of them. Because in a mass of that many, they can protect against bears, wolves. You're a good girl. Oh, that feels good, doesn't it? Oh, yeah, thanks, Dad. Good girl. So they're real popular up here. She's about 3 years old right now. And she thinks she is the big boss, let me tell you. And she lets us know. Thanks, Huck. Good girl. All right, today we're talking about missing people. That's what this is about. And specifically, we're talking about Northern California cases. 2 of them today. One right on the coast, one a little bit inland. And before we get into those, I want to read you an article. And hey, everyone knows you're here. You don't need to tell them. I read this, and I said, you know, the audience needs to hear this, because there's a reason behind this story. The title is, Tahoe Wilderness Victim Missed Rescue by Hours. Lake Tahoe. Starvation and exposure were listed by the coroner's jury here last night as the causes of death of Walter Holland, a 65-year-old Homewood caretaker, a few hours before his body was found beside a pool on General Creek yesterday, after posses had searched vainly for him for nearly a week. Hey, that's annoying. Shh. Come here. Shh. Psst. Testimony developed that Holland probably incurred a compound fracture of one leg on July 8th, which was the day he set out for a few hours of fishing along the creek and had suffered from the pain of the injury and accompanying infection, as well as hunger and exposure, until within the last 24 hours of the discovery of his body. The evidence indicated that the aged man, formerly a sailor, had crawled from where he broke his leg to the bank of the creek and had remained practically still in the same location until his death. It tended to show that Holland probably fainted from pain and exhaustion as he dragged himself to the pool to drink, and that his head became immersed, or that he was too weak to raise his head after quenching his thirst. A casual search of the site by Robert Skate, the cowboy who discovered the body, revealed that the aged man had made heroic efforts to attract attention to his plight and to lead rescuers to his side. He apparently had managed to keep a fire burning fed by matted pine needles in the hope that during the day the smoke would locate his presence and at night the flames would provide warmth. Yesterday, after the recovery of the body, the discoverer hurried to civilization with the corpse draped across the saddle of a horse and neglected to quench Holland's signal fire, which was burning. Late today, the fire spread through pine needles, burning over approximately a half acre. Reports that the campfire had developed into a forest fire were denied by Forest Ranger Raleigh Bryan of the Myers Ranger Station. Rangers passed nearby. The possibility was seen that during the search for Holland, some of the searchers passed close by the place where Holland lay. The probability was considered at such times that they sought by lying temporarily unconscious within a feet or yards of where the Rangers were walking. Holland was a Spanish War veteran and on July 3rd received a pension check for $50. There was no money found on his person yesterday. His purse contained only a set of rosary beads, a signet ring, and a bunch of keys. His friends believed that such money as he possessed was hidden on the premises he occupied in Homewood. Homewood is on the west side of Lake Tahoe. The exact spot where the aged fisherman met with his injury has not been determined. His fishing pole and the blankety blank he removed from the broken leg have not been found. It is believed when they are located, they will indicate the place where the mishap occurred. So far as is known, Holland has no relatives in this country. He is believed to have 2 sisters and 5 brothers in the vicinity of Dublin, Ireland. Now, Dave, why did you read me that story? Well, first of all, growing up, my family had a cabin in Homewood. I know that area super well. Behind it is Desolation Valley Wilderness area. Know that. I find it highly unusual that he wasn't found for several days. I find that really weird. Why? Because a lot of that area you can see a long ways through the trees there. There's not a lot of brush and things down low. But the real reason I read you that story was because of what happened to him. Broken leg. Interesting. They never found his fishing poles and they never found his other supplies. Which, with a broken femur, you are not going anywhere without the greatest pain in your life. Femurs between your knee and your hip. Now, I've known people to break their femur, and they said, Dave, just breathing hurts. Breathing hurts. Now, I broke my tib-fib, both bones in my lower leg, and I can tell you, it's the greatest pain I've ever had in my life times 10. You're not going anywhere. A femur is worse. Bigger bone. Why am I telling you this? Personal locator beacon. Now, back when this happened to Mr. Holland, they didn't have personal locator beacons. But what happened to him could easily happen to you if you're out alone. That's right. And when it happens to you, you're going to wish, like the Dickens, you had one. Because it's amazing to me he was able to drag himself to get water because the pain was atrocious. But I also have some suspicions about really what happened here. He broke his leg somehow, but then all of his supplies were gone. Where could they go? I don't get it. Especially back then, there weren't other people that were around that would ever steal things. They'd always help you, things like that. So, did he fall somehow? Was he dropped? Get where I'm going. All right. So, personal locator beacon. This happens, what you read right there, happens every year at least 4 or 5 times in the United States. Somebody will break their leg out in the woods by themselves. Chances are they'll never be found unless they're on a trail. Or, as in Mr. Holland's case, he was found too late to be alive. He died. Okay. First story involves an Italian woman named Theresa Bacoccio, 43 years old, missing August 10th, 1936. She lived on Folsom Street in San Francisco. Nice area back in 1936. Not a good area now. But her husband died in the previous year, and then soon after her husband died, in a bizarre set of circumstances, her 19-year-old son also died. Unrelated incidents, but it depressed her greatly. Well, it would depress anyone greatly to lose your husband and your son in 1 year. Imagine coming home and having nobody in your house with you. Well, Teresa had a cousin named Mrs. John Ponsolino. The Ponsolinos lived in rural north coast of California, and they had a big ranch. And they raised cattle on this ranch near the coast. Mrs. Ponsolino and the family said it would probably be good for Teresa to get out of the city, spend a week out in the mountains for some fresh air, some new family, be around livestock. That does you a lot of good sometimes. And so she said, yeah, I'll take you up on that. I'll come out. Well, the ranch was a big ranch. A lot of cattle, a lot of other livestock. Now, I know a little bit about this area, and let me explain it to you. Now, first of all, about a week and a half ago, I talked to you about a man who disappeared out of Ukiah. You remember that? If you draw a straight line to the coast from Ukiah, you're going to go right through where this woman disappeared, which I think is a little odd. But it's off a Greenwood Road right near the coast, near Elk. Now, why is it called Elk? Come on, you guys, tell me. That's right. There's elk out here. Roosevelt elk. And a ton of deer. This is a very wild area. Now, what would Dave be doing in that area? Well, that's a very good question, Ollie. I used to love the ocean. Scuba diving, skin diving, anything involving the ocean, I'd go. And I found friends that like to skin dive. Skin dive means you don't have tanks on. And when you want to go for abalone in California, you can't wear tanks. So kind of the bigger the price you pay to get into the area, the easier it is to get your abalone. Meaning if you just drive into a state park, and there's plenty of them up the North Coast, drive into a state park, park your car right near the water, get out, put your stuff in and jump in, you're going to be in there for hours looking for enough abalone because everybody else is looking right there too. So what we'd do is we'd take ropes with us and we'd belay ourselves down the side of a cliff, get down into the area where nobody would go, and we could be in 6-7 feet of water and be picking up abalone on every rock. Now, we all know that there are giant sharks along the North Coast. And I'm not kidding you. Giant great whites everywhere. And why are they there? They're there for the seals. And we'd see seals all the time. If we ever went down into an area and we didn't see seals, many times we'd get out. Because when there's no wildlife around, good chance a shark is around. So seals were always a good sign. I know I'm getting a little deep in the story here, but you'll get this. So several times diving along this remote coast. First of all, we always dove in pairs, and my buddy was always a bigger athlete than me, and we could see how fast we could get our abalone. And he used this, almost looks like a long screwdriver, except it's a flat bar, and there's a engraved mark on the bar where the abalone has to be a certain size. So you'd put the abalone, I'd put the bar under the abalone. If it cleared the mark, pull the abalone off, go to the surface. We usually had an inner tube up there. We'd throw the abalone in the inner tube. So sometimes you'd have to go down to 10, 15 feet, but rarely I had to do that. But it was, if you did it at a time where there was a change in the tide, it'd be real rough. And you get banged into rocks, and there's always sea urchins, and it could get nasty. But so one time I was diving with my buddy, and he's about 15, 20 feet from me, and we always kept each other in sight. Visibility is like 5 to 7 feet. So I dive down, and I see a flash go by me and bump me and scared me to death. I mean, really. It went by, it was kind of grayish in color, like a great white. It hit me pretty hard. And I'm thinking, I'm praying as I'm going to the surface, and I look, and I get to the surface, and like 3 feet from me, looking right in my face, is a seal. I thought, oh, if I could give you a hug right now. And that happened a few times. Never saw a seal again that close, but I think he was just playing. Honestly, he didn't bump me to hurt me, and I think he knew I'd come up right there, and he's just looking at me like, oh, hi there. So it's always a good sign. And we got our limits that day. Usually we would spend a weekend if we drove that far, because it's a long drive from the Bay Area, the South Bay Area, to get there. And we'd have abalone feed that night. Usually make a salad, some garlic bread, and fry up the abalone. And oh boy, nothing better than fresh abalone, I'm telling you. I'm sorry. back to the story. So that's how I know this area really well. So on August 10th, Mrs. Ponsolino and Teresa walk out of the ranch house in the late afternoon, and their job was to round up the cattle and bring them in for the night. So they're bringing them in, and Mrs. Ponsolino says that Teresa's kind of in front of her, walking ahead, and she goes over a knoll, loses sight of her. No big deal. Well, as Mrs. Ponsolino eventually gets back to the ranch, Teresa's not there. She goes, well, that's weird. So she gets her husband, and they start yelling for her, searching for her, and they're not. So they decide to go back to the point where Mrs. Ponsolino saw her on the road going over this little knoll. Well, there's a fork in the road. Fork left goes to the ranch, fork right goes towards the coast. And they see her tracks in the dirt going to the right. So now they get more ranch hands to help, and they search into late at night. Going down the road, she goes off track, and then she goes onto this hillside towards the coast. And it was getting so late they had to pull back. So they get back, and they had already somebody go out and call the deputies. So early that morning, deputies arrived, and they start on this hillside where they last saw her tracks. Well, they talked to neighbors, and neighbors said, yeah, we saw her on the road before she went off the road, and we didn't think much of it. She didn't look like she was hurt or lost. And then one person said that, yeah, I'm a neighbor, and she asked me for a ride, but my house was right here. And I said, hey, I'd give you a ride, but I live right here. So she just kept walking. I thought, well, that's not real neighborly. Give her a ride if the lady needed a ride. So Deputy Arnie Ornbaum arrived and had requested 200 CCC workers, and they started arriving during the day. And he got more deputies as well. And so he decided to split them into different groups to search. And eventually, they got upwards of 300 people and the CC workers to search for 5 days. They started at that hillside, and they searched all over. And they said there wasn't a lot of area for her to go to, except down this hillside into this gully. And they searched both hillsides, up above, down below. And at the end, the searchers said, we didn't find her clothing or fragments of her clothing on any bush, thorn bush, tree, anywhere in the area she would have had to have walked on. And they said that is a mere impossibility. Wow. Well, that's pretty impressive. So where could she have gone? Well, the last day of the search was August 17th, and they had 250 people there, and they searched dawn to dusk. And they all thought that over time, somebody, rounding up cattle, a ranch hand, someone would stumble across her body. Well, they terminated the search. She wasn't found. Then on February 20th, 1937, there was a probate hearing in San Francisco about her home on Folsom Street. Mrs. Ponsolino said there's no way she committed suicide because she wasn't suicidal. And they were fairly certain she was deceased. Well, the judge in the case said that he couldn't rule on it because by law they had to wait 7 years on a missing person to rule that they were deceased. Well, Teresa never went back to her home, was never heard from again, and was never found. Again, I have a tough time with this one, just because this area right in here is very, very remote today. There's not a lot of room to go anywhere. A real whodunit. All right, the next case. This one's just a little north of where Teresa disappeared. Very close to where I worked for 2 years in Hoopa on the book The Hoopa Project and the book Tribal Bigfoot. Don't buy it online, you'll get ripped off. Go to our store, NA, like North America, bigfootsearch.com. So, in this case, we have a very little boy named Vern Mcgahey, 2 years old, goes missing January 27th, 1940 at 9 a.m. He lived with his family in an area near, and I'm going to spell this for you, and you guys figure out how to pronounce it. You spell the city Hyamphon. It's a Wintu name. A lot of Native Americans in the area still. Population of this city at the high point in the last 20 years, 200 people. Lots of logging in 1940. A person owned a mill. Lots of wildlife, deer, elk. Great area for watching wildlife. Been here many times. The parents of the family had been early settlers of the area and had a big ranch. And in early January, this area can get real cold and have snow on the ground. I've seen it. The peaks in the area can get a lot of snow. The elevation in the area is about 1,503 feet. And let me tell you something. Let me show you where it's at first. So this is Eureka, California, the coast. Where I was talking to you about before is down the coast down here, where we just were. Now, Eureka, Alliance, McKinleyville. This is the road I would take all the time from Eureka out to Willow Creek and then up to Hoopa. This is Hoopa. Now this is the spot where the boy disappeared from. Got it? Okay, Huck, I'll let you out. Yeah. There you go. There you go. Now, when I say this is Bigfoot Central, I sincerely mean it. Because the city has historical significance. One of the first locations that people found Bigfoot tracks. The Trinity River goes through this area. And it's beautiful. I mean, it's stunningly gorgeous. It can get real hot in the summer, real cold in the winter. Now, kind of a side story here. When I was going into this city, there wasn't anybody around. I think I stopped in some little store, and a man was standing there. He looked like a friendly guy, and I said, hey, I told him my name. I said, hey, I'm here doing some research on Bigfoot, and I'm looking for some locals that may have some knowledge. And he goes, well, I was a Forest Service supervisor for 25 years. I said, oh, perfect. If he's willing to talk to me, I'm going to listen. Well, he was a very polite guy. And he says, well, I heard the stories about Bigfoot. I never saw one. But I do have a story for you. And I go, oh, this will be good. And he said on a spring day, a few years back, he was managing a series of contract workers. The story's going to sound very similar to one. If you watch Missing 411, the UFO Connection, you're going to say, Dave, did you steal that story from your movie? No, it's actually in the book I wrote about Bigfoot. And that was then like 10, 12 years ago. So he's supervising these people that are planting on a dead hillside from a burn. They're planting new trees. And he says he's standing there, and he goes, almost everybody stops and they look way down in this valley. And they see there's just a classic UFO flying up the valley. And he says it was a little cold, it was foggy, and in the foggy zones it seemed like it would go down lower, like it was looking for something on the ground. And he said it kind of hovered over that area and moved slowly up the valley until it was out of sight. He says, Dave, I'll never forget it. Any of those guys were working with me. Very similar to the story in the UFO Connection involving the elk abduction. Well, there were elk in this area as well. Back to the story of Vern. So Vern was playing outside his cabin early in the morning. and his mom was making breakfast. Young boys, when they smell breakfast, they're hungry. They're not going anywhere. But Vern disappeared. There was a small creek near the cabin, and the mom started searching the area of the creek, called for other friends and family, local settlers. Soon there were hundreds of people there, all searching, yelling for Vern's name. He's not answering. Word spread quickly that something bad had happened. So all the men left their mill jobs, came home, started searching, didn't find anything, searched late into the night. One of them left to get a deputy, and the next day on January 28th, deputies arrived, multiple deputies, and organized the 300 searchers into groups to search various areas around the cabin. They divided it up. And it was during that day, January 28th, that it rained off and on all day. And that concerned searchers because it was cold. It was January. Little Vern was only 2 years old. He'd get hypothermic. They were really concerned. And they had every right to be concerned because that is the chemistry for a bad thing to happen. So they searched until dark. Some searchers stayed out there calling his name all night. Nothing. January 29th, 500 searchers arrived. Again, the deputies divided them up into different groups. One man drove all the way from Eureka to help. That's how far people came. That was a long ways. His name was Cyril Dean. And Cyril was given a task out about 2 miles from the home, down along the same creek. And they said, yeah, this area had been searched like 5 or 6 times, but over 2 days. But we need you to go back down in there and search deeper if you can. So as he's going down to that area, he was searching back and forth, back and forth. It was about noon. And he hears some rustling in a bush right near this creek. Well, he calls out Vern's name. Hey, Vern, is that you? He goes, I don't know what it was, a bear, what? Vern stands up, and he puts his arm out, like, come hold me, come pick me up. So Cyril says that he goes over, picks the boy up, and he said, Vern never said anything. He talked to him, asked him, he never said a word. But he said that he took him straight back to his home. And his mom got him, he felt hot, and he had a slight fever. Now, if you're new to Missing 411, this may not be important, but I will tell you that many of these young kids that are found have a very small fever. Now, Vern never talked, never could say what happened. But other searchers said that area where he was found had been searched multiple times. But Cyril said that the most unusual feature of all of this was that Vern was essentially dry. Which didn't make any sense, because the day before it rained all day. And kids move. They don't stay stationary, which as a searcher you'd want them to. But they don't move much. Now, he disappeared just before breakfast. Most kids wouldn't do that. They'd want dinner, breakfast. He's found in an area that had been previously searched multiple times. And he's found adjacent to water. This was a picture of Vern right before he disappeared with his mom. And again, he was found in really good health, slight fever. Everything else was fine. And I consider that very, very abnormal. Well, those are the 2 stories today, folks, with a couple of Dave's stories mixed in. Thanks for being here. You are appreciated beyond reproach. I greatly admire all of you for just hanging in there with me. And make sure you're subscribed. Make sure that you're kind. and I know all of you guys are, I don't need to remind you, I read stories every once in a while from you guys about doing some really, really nice things for others, and that's really what life is about. Thank you. Be nice. Peace out.